Welcome to AINdebrief, where we take a look back at the most important aviation stories of the past week by the AIN editors who covered them. I'm AIN Alerts editor Chad Troutvetter. In this week's episode, Editor-in-Chief Matt Thurber gives an overview of AIN's coverage next week of FIA Connect, also known as the virtual Farnborough Airshow. He also updates us on the Dassault Falcon 6X program as it prepares to shift from building prototypes to starting flight testing next year. Senior editor Curt Epstein conveys the European Business Aviation Association and Air Charter Association's warnings about charter fraud. Wichita-based editor Jerry Siebenmark discusses more layoffs at Textron Aviation, and London-based editor Charles Alcock overviews UK industry group ADS's concerns about the lack of government financial support for aerospace research in light of both the COVID pandemic and Brexit. Next week is FIA Connect, Matt. So tell us what AIN is doing to cover the event.
So FIA Connect is the replacement for the Farnborough Airshow, which was to have taken place July 20th through 24th this year. But as with most other aviation shows and conventions this year, was canceled because of the coronavirus pandemic. So FIA Connect is the virtual replacement for the Farnborough Airshow. And there's quite a few events going on during the show. There's going to be every day many different online sessions that people can tune into for free. And easiest thing to do is go to the website connect.farnboroughairshow.com and sign up for some of the events and see what's going on there. Now, during the week, Aviation International News is going to cover the news from these events during the show, and also from some of the other companies that might have been exhibiting if the real Farnborough Airshow had gone on. This is going to include a daily newsletter from AIN, as well as on the Thursday towards the end of the show, we're going to publish a digital magazine with all the news from the show.
And that's a flip-through magazine, right, Matt?
That's correct. That'll be a flip-through magazine. You can read it on your mobile devices or on your computer.
And then also we'll probably have some videos, and then we can wrap up in the podcast next week, the highlights from the show as well, right?
That's right. We'll be publishing videos every day for companies associated with the event, and we will have a wrap-up podcast to tell everybody some of the highlights from the event.
Okay, great. So let's get into the news from this week. The Dassault Falcon 6X program is progressing. There's 3 prototypes that are underway. So what's the status on the program, Matt?
The Falcon 6X is well underway, and first flight is still scheduled for early next year, and everything is going along just as it needs to right now to keep the program on track. One of the big pacing milestones, of course, is the Pratt & Whitney PW812D engines and the nacelles for those engines, which are made by Pratt's sister company, Collins Aerospace. And the first engine, they're called podded engines with the nacelles, were delivered last week to Dassault.
What's the status of the 3 prototypes?
There's going to be 3 flying prototypes, and the first one has been powered up. It's undergoing ground testing to get ready for that first flight next year. And the second and third are advancing along in their assembly process. And the second aircraft, for example, had the wings mated to the fuselage. The third aircraft is in the stages of final assembly. Now, the third airplane is a significant one because that's the one that'll be fitted with a full production interior. That's going to be used for testing acoustics, airflow, comfort, and other factors. And it's kind of interesting to note Dassault has a very rigorous interior sound program that measures a ton of different areas inside the cabin during flight. And they work to quiet the cabin to achieve what they call a high comfort note number. And the comfort note takes into account a lot of different factors, but essentially the higher the number, the quieter it is and much more comfortable for the passengers.
You've been out to Dassault. What's it like at the production line there?
Last year, I had the pleasure of visiting the factory where the first metal parts get assembled to start the first main structure, which is the wing center section. And it's a fascinating operation to see. What really struck me there was the friendliness of everybody who worked there. I could not walk by somebody without them walking up to me, shaking my hand and giving me a big smile and welcoming me with something they said in French. I'm not quite sure what it was.
And they use a high amount of automation on their production lines too, right?
That's true. They're using riveting machines and lots of different automated processes. But actually, at the time I saw it, it was more of a factory setup stage. So they were still doing quite a bit of work by hand.
Anything else about the 6X that you know that nobody else does, Matt?
Well, the Pratt & Whitney engines have undergone initial airborne testing, and this summer they're going to conduct a second series of flight tests. A lot of other testing has also been done for initial certification, including bird strike, ice ingestion, and blade off tests. But all of this work is accelerating on the way to getting the 6X ready for entry into service in 2022.
Okay, thanks, Matt. So, Jerry, Textron announced more layoffs this week. What's going on there?
Well, that's a good question, Chad. They originally their parent company, Textron Inc., announced in mid-June that there were going to be a total that they were going to reduce headcount at 3 business segments, totaling about 1,950 people. And at the time, neither the parent company nor Textron Aviation would say how many, because Textron Aviation was one of the 3 business segments identified for layoffs, but neither Textron Inc. nor Textron Aviation would say at that time how many of that 1950 were going to come from Textron Aviation. And then probably about a week later, Textron Aviation announced that it was cutting 250 jobs. Most of those actually, I think all but 70 some odd jobs happened outside of Wichita.
And those were mostly non-production of that segment, right?
Right. And then you fast forward a couple of weeks, and then Textron Aviation announces that it's cutting 80 jobs in Wichita that are non-production, followed by an announcement this week that they were cutting 100 jobs, mostly in Wichita, including production people. Their sort of standard line is that the reasons behind the layoffs are they're adjusting to an evolving global economic uncertainty and existing market conditions. So it's anybody's guess, I guess, except with the top executives at Textron Aviation, how much longer this is going to continue.
Brian Foley, in a report about 2 or 3 weeks ago, talked about the demand for aircraft, being less this year. and he attributes that to why the OEMs are shedding jobs. What else did the report say? Why, what's going on?
He said he didn't expect any meaningful pickup new jet orders in the near term, and that's why he explained that folks shouldn't expect Bombardier, Gulfstream, or Textron to see higher deliveries. And he attributed that to a number of reasons, one of which is even though the charter operators are seeing, at least for the short term, they've been seeing a noticeable pickup in business, including from people who have never flown charter before. But he argued that those charter operators, that many of them, they're flying managed aircraft. They're not flying their own aircraft. So there's no demand that's going to come for new jets from the charter operators. And the same would be true on the fractional side. So those were a couple of reasons why he concluded that deliveries would be down, at least through the rest of the year.
And I guess you live in Wichita. What's the feeling? Is this kind of the bottom for Cessna here with layoffs, or is there fear that there might be more coming?
It's just hard to say right now, Chad. I think there's still some concern that there's more coming. Obviously, our local economy has been hit pretty hard. We've just across town from Cessna, we have Spirit Aerosystems, and they build 75% of the Boeing 737 MAX. They build fuselage. And obviously, we all know what the problems with Max are, and then you compound that with the dramatic fall off in aviation activity because of the pandemic. We've lost thousands of jobs over at Spirit Aerosystems. So when you say you got a couple hundred here and there at Textron Aviation, I don't know that it has as meaningful an impact. But from the folks that I visit with, I think there's some expectation that this probably isn't the last of it.
That's not good to hear. So, Curt, you did a story this week. EBAA and the Air Charter Association warned about charter fraud. So, what do they have to say? What's going on? What's the deal with what they're saying?
Well, Chad, as with every catastrophe, there is always somebody looking to make a buck off this illegally. And that's what's happening in this case. We have an increase in at least short-haul charter with people. Obviously, the commercial airlines are facing severe constraints. People may not be able to get where they want to using commercial traffic, or people who have the means to travel privately are not wishing to travel in large groups of passengers. So the rates of charter are rising. And with that, we have companies that are looking to, not companies, but individuals who are looking to insert themselves in the process by launching fake fraudulent websites. And these websites can use actual names. They can harvest photos of actual aircraft, use the actual aircraft registration numbers, and even send off either copied or fake invoices to people who are paying them and expecting to get flights, and they're not. So they've warned that this is on the rise, and they've noted that there's some ways to take. They said online fraud's unfortunately here to stay. And basically they said, you're looking at these things on the consumer side to trust your instincts. If something looks bad, it most likely is. They say you should check out any charter before you engage it, any new charter company that you haven't done business with. You should check them out with the Air Charter Association and with EBAA, the European Business Aviation Association. In the meantime, companies should also search and do Google searches to try and find out if their aircraft are being shown on other websites other than theirs or those that they're supposed to be on. So if you find strange or new names in a Google ad result, have a closer look at that page. They say what companies are also doing, these fraudulent companies, is they're also paying to have their listings high up in the Google Analytics. So if you type in charter, these fraudulent sites will come up, in some cases ahead of the actual companies. So just basic measures, they say. If there's a phone number, call it. Make sure that it works. Check the financial dealings of the company. And if you do think you spotted a scam website, you should report it to Google and take any names or people. And if those companies are spoofing actual charter companies, legitimate charter providers, make them aware of it so that they can take action against this.
And have they noted? Have they said anybody's been caught by this yet, or they're just seeing this online and just giving a heads up warning before anybody gets burnt?
They're seeing this. They didn't specify whether there were any cases where people have actually been taken in, but one would assume that there have been. So as far as that goes, they say if you know someone who's the victim of one of these scams, tell them to file charges with their local law enforcement agencies, again, to inform the two organizations. And for charters and brokers, make sure that their customers are aware of these things and let them know, make them well known that what can be done, and encourage them to work with established and credible companies.
And I imagine, at least here in the United States, if you use a credit card to purchase charter, at least you have some kind of advocate on your side should it be a fraudulent transaction, right?
You do, and charter flights don't come cheap. So in many cases, you probably would be doing this transfer on a credit card. So you have that going for you. But just to avoid having you thinking you have a charter flight lined up on a certain day and finding out that they've never heard of you when you go there to get on your plane, you want to do all these things, and you want to make sure that it is legitimate, it's above board, and that you're dealing with whom you think you're dealing with, rather than have to deal with all that. That confusion and upset on the back end.
Okay, thanks, Curt. Charlie, you talked to the head of the UK aerospace consortium this week, and he has a couple concerns about the aerospace industry in the UK, right?
Yes, he does. And these concerns have escalated, as you would well imagine, in recent months in the fallout from the COVID pandemic. But the guy I spoke to is called Paul Everett. He's the chief executive of ADS, which is the UK industry group. He spoke to me a week ahead of their FIA Connect event, which they're having instead of the Farnborough Airshow. And his number one concern is the clear shrinking in the industry. I mean, there have been, off the top of my head, at least 20,000 job cuts announced within the UK industry alone. And of course, that's terrible news. But his longer term concern is, where is this going to leave the industry in terms of its ability to keep regenerating itself with new technology and new products? And what he wants to see very urgently is a serious, concerted, long-term investment plan supported in various ways by the UK government to make sure that once aerospace gets through this terrible year that it's going through, and perhaps next year could be terrible too, it has a path to not only to survival, but to success. And, he's pointing to the example of countries like France, Germany, and the US and saying, look, those governments are already doing this. They're already putting their money where their mouth is. He was trying to be very tactful. I can be less tactful, but, I think what he has in mind is that the UK government's very good at coming out and saying, gee, we should have an electric airliner available by 2050. Wouldn't that be a fantastic goal to have? But then doesn't actually back that up with any action. It just sets these sort of fancy sounding aspirations without there being much substance behind them. And, really he's saying this is very, very urgent. It's not about what happens in the next few months, but it's about convincing the wider industry that the UK has a viable industry, because otherwise, there's not going to be inward investment in the UK. There's not going to be partnership. Nobody is going to, be willing to attach their ship to the UK industry if they're worried that the moorings might slip in the coming years. So that was his big concern. Now, before COVID, of course, his biggest concern for the UK industry was the fallout from Brexit. And that problem hasn't got away. I hate to break it to you. We're in the transition period now. At the end of this year, that transition period ends. And one of the consequences of that is that the UK, much to the alarm of just about everybody in the industry, will be leaving EASA, the regulatory agency for Europe. And the key point here that Paul Everett raised is that if we're not going to be in EASA, which he makes it very clear he'd far rather we had stayed in EASA, he said at the very least we have to have a bilateral aviation safety agreement that means that the UK can kind of keep working with EASA in a reasonable way. And the problem is that the wider negotiations between the UK and the European Union are now going so badly that it looks like we're going to end up with what everybody's called a no-deal Brexit. And one of the consequences of that there would be no bilateral aviation safety agreement. And he's saying, for heaven's sake, can't we just remove this bilateral agreement on aviation, which everybody agrees is a good idea, and not make that a hostage to the political standoff over the wider trade issues? So that's really what's on his mind. I admire him because he makes strong points without being indiscreet and provocative. But he's dead serious about these problems.
And I guess with Brexit, it's not only the regulatory, CA, working with EASA or some kind of alignment there, but also the EU has a lot of money invested in the technologies that you were talking about, and without that money, the UK would have to basically fund all of the research in the UK, right? Yeah,
that's exactly right. And really, the main phrase here is, why on earth should we reinvent the wheel? The UK was centrally involved in the creation of EASA in the early years. I remember covering that. And, EASA, whatever you say about it, has come up with a very coherent set of rules and standards for regulating the industry. So, why would the UK industry want to throw all of that out and say, hey, let's just start all over again and have our own rules? It's just totally inefficient. And, for people who want to, for example, certify new aircraft in the UK, they're not going to want to go down some UK path of certification and then have to do pretty much the same thing all over again with EASA. And it further undermines the UK aerospace sector's attractiveness as a place to come and invest and a place to partner with UK companies. So it's, whatever your views on Brexit, it just really doesn't seem to make any sense. And unfortunately, it's become, a hostage to this wider political disagreement, I should say.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like there's any solution anytime soon, right?
Not really. I mean, everybody says, well, somebody's going to have to blink. But, people in the UK aerospace industry are just getting increasingly nervous and saying we just can't keep sitting around waiting for a deal to happen.
Have any aerospace companies moved or opened up offices within the EU region to continue that continuity?
Well, before Brexit was actually finalized, in other words, leading up to the end of last year, before Brexit was, a done deal, if you like, I am certainly aware of aircraft operators in the UK who very purposely established an AOC operation in another EU country in order to have kind of a foot in the door. We haven't yet seen too much by way of manufacturers saying, that's it, we're leaving the UK, we're going to some other country. But I think that's partly because they've been sort of hedging their bets. And what we haven't seen much of, in fact, I don't think we've seen any of, is new investment in facilities within the UK. So, some might say, what's the big deal? There hasn't been this mass exodus. Maybe there hasn't, but that's not really the point. There equally hasn't been any new investment either. And, I think what we will see, and companies like Airbus have hinted at this, is that, that what you're going to see is that they won't invest in new stuff in the UK. Instead, that new investment will go to other EU locations. And that's where the damage is. And what Paul Everett's saying is we can't sit around waiting for that to happen and then wring our hands and say, how did that happen? We need to act now. Thanks,
Charlie. Thanks for listening to AINdebrief. Another podcast episode will air next Friday. In the meantime, go to www.ainonline.com for the latest aviation news from AIN.